Hello everyone, it's good to have you on board. So I'm not time before you. I'm optimistic that we should conclude with code. So in our next class, we'll be taking the calculation part of the course. It has been said, let's succeed into it. Okay, so I have STT205, and speaking of the basic concepts, okay, speaking of the basic concepts, we want to look at, we want to talk about, we want to take our bearing from what we call entity, okay? We want to talk about what entity is. Don't forget that in our last class, we talked about statistics, okay? And we made it clear that organizations, government parastatals, individuals, corporations, NGOs, everybody uses statistics. Important in getting information, recording, accounting, transparency, and communicating this information to make informed decisions. So the basics in the concept, all right, the basic concept in statistics is what we're going to be talking about tonight. Now, very quickly, let's take it up from what we call entity. Okay? So now when we say entity, what are we talking about? Entity may be a person, all right, place, thing on which we make observation. All right? So we have entity. I think I need to change my marker. Okay, so we have entity. So entity could be a person, could be a place, could be a thing on which we make observation. Now, in studying the nutritional well-being of pupil in primary school, the entity is said to be the pupil in the school. Anything worthy of observation, all right, then we are talking about entity, all right. A substance, all right, object or being, all right, worthy of observation slash observable. They refer to that as an entity. Now, when we say variable, we have variable. When we say variable, what are we talking about? Variable is said to be what? A characteristics that assumes what? Different values for different entities. The what? The characteristic that assumes assumes different values for different entities. And characteristics that does what? That assumes. So variables and entity works intertwined. Okay? Characteristics that assumes different. Okay? It's written outside. Just positive that the energy will not be interrupted. Now, there's something called under variable. All right, we have some categories, subcategories under it, right? So, variable is said to be the characteristic that assume different values for different entity. All right. So now, under that, we have what we call random, okay, variable. When we say random variable, it is the probability function and the variable a random. Now, when we say random variable, it is said to be what? The probability function of a variable. Probability function of a variable. Now, when we say probability function of a variable, we are simply talking about the chances that out of this variable we can get a certain variable if so action is being taken. In the sense that if toss or if you flip a coin, all right, a coin has two faces. So that you are getting the head or the tail. You cannot flip a coin and get both at the same time. All right. So the probability that when you flip a coin, you can either get head or tail is 1. All right. Like you see what I'm saying? That just happened. Is 1 in the sense that you must get either head or you will get tail. Okay. Is either you must get head or you must get tail. Just give me a moment on more energy. I think it's manageable this way. So now I really want us to cover a lot, so we might just have to continue after all. So now we have also there's something called quantitative variable. Okay, now this is a variable whose value are given as what? Numeric quantities. When we say quantitative, I'm going to make it a bit I'm going to make my writing bold so we can see clearly now that the room is not so bright. All right, so we have quantitative. So permit me to abbreviate QV. That's quantitative variable. Now, quantitative variable are those what? Variables whose value are variables whose what? Values are given in what? Okay. Given as numerical quantities. As what? Numerical quantity. Okay, allow your business. Good evening. Good evening. So, like I said earlier, I really want us to go far or even finish everything with the theoretical part of this course, so that at least before our revision we can have 1 or 2 classes on the calculation part of this course. So now let's continue. So we also have what we call the qualitative variable. Now, speaking of the qualitative variable, these variables are variables that is not measurable in numerical form. So quantitative variables can be measured numerically. All right, why qualitative? All right, qualitative variables cannot be measured numerically. So let's just pay attention. Now, we also have what is called discrete. All right, discrete variable. When we say discrete variable, what are we talking about? Discrete variable, all right, are variable that can only what? Assume all numbers. Only what? Assume all numbers. only assumes what? Whole numbers. Variables that can only assume whole numbers. Okay, so let's take that as that. Now, don't forget we are talking about basic entities, all right, basic concepts about statistics in statistics. So now in statistics, we also said something about it's all about gathering of information to make informed decisions, observing to gather information in order to make informed decisions. Now, okay, we need to understand that in statistics there's something called population. There's something called population. When we say population, what are we talking about? All right, it's in the population that we extract. Sorry about the network. That's what it's like here. So it's in the population that we extract what we call sample population. Okay. So now look at it here. It says sample after population. Sample is the part of population that is selected for a study. All right. So we have sample. Okay, the part of population selected, yes, for study. Okay, population sample population is said to be the what? The part of population selected for study. So we also have that as that. We have the random sample, which is said to also be the probability function of a sample. Now, speaking of statistics, all right, data is highly essential. And speaking of data, which we refer to as unprocessed information or raw facts, okay? Now, data is further categorized into what? Primary, all right, and secondary data. All right, this is not something we need to waste much time on. We've heard of data, and we know that data, when we say primary data, we're talking about data that are first-hand, undiluted data. All right, data that are collected, all right, directly, all right, collected specifically for a purpose and used for the purpose for which they are collected, undiluted data. Okay, they always now talk of the secondary. All right, secondary data are not collected directly. All right, they are being diluted. This data is what used by a person or people other than the person or people by whom the data is collected. So now this is more like primary data is collected by the researcher for a particular purpose and is used by that researcher for that particular purpose. But secondary data now is not collected, or is collected by a researcher, but he's not the one who wants to use it. He still has to transfer the data to another person or to another group, all right, to before the data can be used. So it's more like this primary data is gotten from directly from the source, and secondary data is gotten from one person to the other before it gets to the person who will be using the data. All right. So it says here they are collected frequently for administrative reasons. This is the secondary data and used for the purpose for which they are not collected. Okay. So we have that as that. We have the likes of journals, newspaper, magazines, and the likes. Okay. So examples of secondary data, they include accidents, fatalities on particular road, right? They so we have that as that. So now let's take a step further. There is something called macro statistic information. Okay, macro, I believe we all remember in our 100 level second semester where we treated micro and macro economy. When we say macro, we're talking about economy at a large scale. All right, a glance of the economy on a large scale. I always say micro, we're talking about economic decision of individuals and households. Okay, so now speaking of the macro statistical information, these are produced by what? Public sector of the economy. Okay, so we have the macro statistic information. Macro statistic information. This information are produced by where? By the public sector. Public sector. All right, public sector of the economy. They are produced by the public sector of the economy. Now, macroeconomic is concerned with such aggregates, all right, as national income, gross national product, savings, consumption, gross domestic product, and so on, since it is on the larger glance of the economy. So it doesn't concern itself. Speaking of the macro statistic information, all right, it doesn't concern itself with individuals and firms. Is more of what the nation is doing on a general glance, all right, on a general palace. That's what it's considering, and that's all about that. Okay, so still talking about observation, gathering of intels and data to make certain decisions, we can not underestimate or push aside the use of what we call questionnaire. Okay, now when we talk about questionnaire, what are we simply talking about? It's something that is not actually is not new to us, something we must have heard about for now. So now when we say questionnaire, we're talking about a document, all right, a list of questions. This document contains list of what? Questions drawn in such a way that the questions are related to what? The objective of the study being conducted, and the response to the questions will be what? Analyzed to provide solutions to the problems that was asked. Now, questionnaire, speaking of which, it's a document you use in your research. All right, this is a document you use when conducting your research. And why do you use this document? Okay, you have to give it to your respondent to help fill and respond to certain questions on this questionnaire. You know what it is? I said it's a list of questions. A list of questions, and this list of questions is drawn, all right, and it is related, it is pointing to at a particular problem the researcher intends to solve. The topic of the project, the topic of the research is related to it, and respondents are expected to give their thoughts about what the research and the question presented to them is all about. Now, there are basically two types of questionnaires. Like we all know, we have two types, which are the structured and the unstructured. The structured and the unstructured questionnaire. Okay, basically, very simple explanation to this is that the structured questionnaire is more like answers like respondents are to respond to specific questions in a specific way. Yes or no questions are questions like yes or no, true or false, agree, disagree, strongly disagree, agree, strongly disagree, strongly agree. There are structured questionnaires, but the unstructured questionnaires are the ones that allow respondents to explain in details, express themselves, and this is more like structured questionnaire is more like the PO of the CBT exam thing, and the structure is more like the POP exam thing. There's a pen on paper. So we have that as that. So now there's something we want to talk about very quickly, which is called the class interval. All right. So we have something called the class interval. Just a moment. So we have class interval. Something we'll be needing a lot. All right. Now when we say class interval, it's said to be what? A non-overlapping intervals selected in such a way that they are mutually exclusive, right, and collectively exhaustive. Wow. Now it says here that a class interval, just like I said, is mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive. Now let's take this point. What was the first thing it says? It says overlapping intervals. Now let's underline the word intervals. Something happening, all right, at a particular point, all right, an action pinned to a particular point. Intervals. Something happening at a particular time, the next happening at a particular time, and at each time all these occurrences are happening. At each time all these occurrences are happening, they have nothing in common. All right, they have, it says here that they are what? Mutually exclusive. All right, so let's take this down. Non-overlapping intervals. They are non-overlapping intervals, and these events, these happenings, they are actually what? Arranged and selected. They are arranged and selected in a way that they are what? Mutually exclusive. Arranged and selected in a what? Mutually exclusive way. Now let me give you an example of this. Now, when we say an example is, we can have in a class of 100 students, let's put them according to level of intervals that we can have 5 to 10. All right, we can have 11 to 20. We can have 21 to 30. All right, grouping them in intervals. Now this set of group, they are different from the set of group. Nothing is joining every set. Nothing, they have nothing in common, right? So they are overlapping, all right, intervals arranged and selected in a what? A mutually exclusive way. Okay, so we have that as that. Okay, now let's we also have what we call the class limits. So it says here, for any class interval there are two class limits. All right, we have a class limit where we have the upper and the lower class limit. Okay, the upper and the lower class limit. So I'm going to erase this just from the top. So the class limit has two what? Has two, for any class interval, there are what we call two class limits. Alright, which is the lower and the upper. So now the lower class limit could be set of students in this group, then let's say 2, 4, 6, 8, and we have the upper to be, the upper could be 10, the upper could be 20, could be 30, and this could be 40. Okay, so we have class boundaries. For any class interval, there are two class boundaries. All right, for any class interval, there are two class boundaries. All right, class boundaries. All right, any class limit. All right, for any class interval, I beg your pardon, there are two class boundaries. All right, for any class interval, there are what? Two class boundaries. So we have that as that. We have the lower class boundary, and we have the lower class boundary of any class now. Okay, yeah, for any class interval, we have low class boundary. So we have the lower class boundary as of class interval. It means of two of the lower class limits and that. So definitely, so we have here, we have upper and the lower. So here we have the upper and the lower as well. So in our next class, hopefully, we are still going to have a class on the theoretical part of this. We are going to be talking about the ungrouped data, and I think we've done half of the material already. So hopefully in our next class on Friday, we should call it a wrap of the course. Thank you very much, everyone. I believe we are able to get a thing or two into this class. Please let's do well to keep our notes up to date and submit them to the appropriate quarters. And I look forward to seeing you all in subsequent tutorials. To have a wonderful evening. Good night.